Hi there, my name is Ashley Berman and I'm a board certified behavior analyst. We are going to talk about behavioral contingencies today. It's going to be a nice little introduction about how we view behavior and how we change behavior, especially in the classroom. So I hope you have a lot of fun. We're going to start off with the question, what is behavior? So, pretty simple definition, behavior is anything that an organism does that changes the environment. What are some examples that you can think of behavior? Just look around you. What can you identify as behavior? Some examples could be tapping your finger on the desk. It could be taking a drink of water. It could be going to the bathroom or writing an answer on a piece of paper. Those are all examples of behavior. It might be better to talk about behavior in terms of what is not behavior. So we have this concept called the dead man's test. And it is exactly what it sounds like. And I wanted to find a picture to go along with this slide, but I didn't want anything too morbid. So think to yourself, could a dead person do this behavior that I'm targeting? If the answer is yes, it's not a behavior. And this is important because when we write goals for behavior change, sometimes the goal we write is going to say, I want to increase the amount of time that Billy sits at his desk. Well, is sitting at his desk a behavior? I don't know. If I put a dead body at a desk, it would probably sit there for as long as I left it. And I guess now that I'm thinking about it, it could be called like a doll's test, because a doll would do the same thing. It would just sit there. So instead of writing it for, I want him to sit at his desk for so long, how can we write it for an active behavior, an actual behavior? Do you want to decrease the amount of time he spends walking around the room or out of his seat? Or do you want to increase the amount of time that he is engaging in on-task behavior? And then you would objectively define on-task behavior. But it's an important thing to think about. Is what your goal is targeting an actual behavior that you can shape up? Now I've mentioned shaping behavior. And what do I mean by shaping behavior? How is behavior shaped? When we talk about shaping behavior, we're talking about the act of learning. It's as simple as that. Learning new things, as we said, behavior is everything. So learning new things is shaping of behavior. Behavior is shaped through the following contingency: antecedent, behavior, and consequence. ABC. Antecedent is what happens right before the behavior. And the behavior is the action. And the consequence is what happens right after the behavior. We're going to start with talking about consequences first because of the way that this slideshow pairs with the prompting slideshow. But you can talk about antecedents and consequences in either order. So consequences can be reinforcing or punishing, and they can also be positively reinforcing or negatively reinforcing, or positively punishing or negatively punishing. So when we talk about a consequence being reinforcing, it is increasing the likelihood that future behavior will occur. And when we talk about a consequence being punishing, remember, we're talking about the effect that the consequence has on the behavior. So if it's punishing the behavior, it's decreasing the likelihood that future behavior will occur. And positive and negative talks about what's going on in the environment during that consequence. If something is positive, that means you're adding to the environment. Think about electrons. If it's positively charged, you've got extra, right? And then negative means you're taking something out of the environment. It's ending or it's being taken away. So here are some examples. Let's dive into these contingencies. If something is being positively reinforced, it means you are adding something to the environment that increases the likelihood of future behavior. It's not necessarily praise. And we will talk about calling something a reinforcer and calling something a punisher later. But it's important to remember that just because we think something is a positive reinforcer doesn't mean that it is for that individual. So here's an example of positive reinforcement. Every time Johnny claps his hands, which is the behavior, he gets an M&M. And then Johnny begins clapping his hands twice as much. So you have the behavior, which is clapping his hands. He gets an M&M, so something is being added to his environment that wasn't there before, and in the future his behavior increases. That's positive reinforcement. So negative reinforcement removes something from the environment that increases the likelihood of future behavior. Don't think of negative reinforcement as a bad thing. Remember, reinforcement is the effect the consequence has on the behavior, and the negative or positive is just the change in environment. So negative reinforcement, I'm adding something to the environment that's going to increase the likelihood of future behavior. For example, when Johnny puts his toys away before dinner, his mom tells him he won't have to do the dishes after dinner. In the future, Johnny always puts his toys away before dinner. So you can also think of negative reinforcement as avoidance of an aversive. For Johnny, doing the dishes after dinner is an aversive. He doesn't want to do it. He can avoid coming into contact with that aversive by changing his behavior. By putting his toys away, that aversive is removed. And because of the removal of that aversive, it's likely that he will increase in that target behavior in the future. And now let's talk about the punishment aspect. So we have positive punishment, which is what we think of when we hear the word consequence. So if you were just going to be talking in your everyday life and say, well, my kid's going to have a consequence for that, you're thinking of positive punishment. It's adding something to the environment that decreases the likelihood of future behavior. Remember, punishment is the effect the consequence has on the behavior, and positive is just what's happening in the environment. So for example, if I was giving this presentation live and the audience started booing me after the slideshow, I might not be likely to present again. And if I wasn't likely to present again, then that booing changed the likelihood of my future behavior. It was positively punishing the behavior of me presenting this slideshow. Negative punishment is the opposite. It's removing something from the environment that decreases the likelihood of future behavior. When Johnny hits his head, his mom turns off the TV. Johnny hits his head less frequently in the future. I feel like we use a lot of negative punishment in the field. So if a child's engaging in choice time and they have problem behavior, typically choice time then ends. So that is negative punishment. We are taking something out of the environment to change future behavior. It's important for us to talk about future behavior because that's how you know your consequence procedure is working. There are some things to think about when we are writing plans for our students. The first one is we often provide consequences that we would enjoy or that would be punishing to us, without seeing if it's actually reinforcing or punishing for the child. There are systematic ways to determine if things are reinforcing. So talk to your behavior specialist if you want to learn more about how to conduct a reinforcer assessment. Also, it's important to remember that preferred and reinforcing are not the same thing. There can be things that are preferred but are not reinforcing. And there can be things that are reinforcing that are not necessarily preferred. Can you think of any examples of something that's preferred but not reinforcing? What comes to mind is this concept we have called the matching law, which talks about the amount of behavior that's required needs to match the amount of reinforcement required. I think of it as a cost-benefit analysis for reinforcement and behavior. So I may prefer to eat carrots. And at sometimes eating carrots may be reinforcing for me. But if you ask me to run 10 miles and then just give me a carrot afterwards, I probably won't continue to do that behavior in the future because that reinforcer didn't match the amount of effort I had to put in. This is really important to think about when we're thinking about our students. How much work are we asking them to do versus how much reinforcement are they getting? That's why we have individualized plans so that we can adjust for issues in matching. And students will tell you when you have thinned reinforcement too quickly. They will stop doing the behavior. So pay attention. It's great for your students to have as much reinforcement as they need. It's not a bad thing at all. What about something that's reinforcing but it's not preferred? This is a little trickier one. I've only thought of one example, and it's a little blue. So when you feel that your stomach is hurting and you feel it rumbling around, you go to the bathroom, and if you void, you feel better. So that is reinforcing. You are more likely next time you experience that pain to go to the bathroom and void again. Is that going to the bathroom preferred? Probably not, but it is reinforcing. So they are two very different things, and there are ways to test for both preference and reinforcement. Now we're going to go back and we're going to talk about antecedents. Remember, antecedents are the things that happen right before behavior occurs. And antecedents can signal the availability of reinforcement or punishment and can cue the behavior to happen. We can control when behavior happens by manipulating the antecedent conditions. Something we use a lot in special education is a red-green board. We put a visual of whatever the choice item is, and on the green side, that signals to the student that they can have that item. When it's on the red side, it signals to the student that it's not available, so they probably won't ask for it when it's on the red side. Another example is when you're sitting in class and the bell goes off, and you get up and you go to your next class. The bell going off is the antecedent. The bell going off also has a lot of stimulus control. It is a discriminative stimulus. When a behavior happens only in the presence of a certain antecedent, like the bell going off, and not in the presence of other antecedents, like the teacher talking, we say that it is a discriminative stimulus. It has stimulus control over the behavior. Another example of a discriminative stimulus would be a stoplight. You stop the car in the presence of the stoplight. The stoplight signals to you that it is time to stop your car. You wouldn't stop your car if the light was green. No, green means go. Green is a discriminative stimulus for driving the car. There's also something called a setting condition or motivating operations. I like to think of them as super antecedents. So what's going on in the environment that could change the effectiveness of the reinforcement or punishment? A really simple example of this is if I just ate a lot of food, food might not be an effective reinforcer at this moment, even though it usually is. So we need to think about behavioral contingencies in the context in which they occur. Behavior does not occur in a vacuum. So we need to look at everything that's going on if our behavioral contingency is not working the way that we thought that it would, or if we're trying to determine why a behavior exists or doesn't exist. You need to look at the full picture of what's going on in that child's environment to make decisions and write plans. We get super sick of reinforcers, which is called satiation, and we can combat that by having more options. So a way to do that is by having secondary reinforcement or token economies. That way, the student is getting reinforcement, but they can pick from a variety of reinforcers so they're not getting bored of the same thing over and over again. If someone decided that your only reinforcement was going to be a piece of chocolate, after 7 hours straight of receiving a piece of chocolate, you'd probably get sick of it and you would need something else. There are ways that you have to train token economies, so it's not a good idea to just throw one at a kid. You have to pair it with the reinforcement first. But we're not going to go super deep into that. You can ask your behavior specialist if you have questions. Some notes about consequences in general, but particularly about punishment. Consequences need to be immediate and great if they're going to be super, super effective. This is especially for punishment. Punishment needs to be fast and it needs to be big. But for reinforcement, remember the matching law. Reinforcement also needs to match the amount of behavior. And the more immediate a consequence is, and the larger a consequence is, the more likely it is to pair with that behavior and change the likelihood of the behavior in the future. Also, punishment is not inherently aversive. For example, think about negative punishment, where you're taking something away. And we do use punishment procedures at Monarch. We try not to use aversive consequences. But we do know that things in life are sometimes aversive. I don't want to pay my bills. I don't want to go to work. There are tons of things that I find aversive, but I have to do them anyways. Aversive is not inherently bad. Aversive is just the way that you feel about what's going on in your environment. And the bottom line is, words matter, and use them wisely. For example, if you get a behavior plan and you're consulting with a parent on it, and it says we're going to use a negative punishment procedure, you probably wouldn't say that to the parent. You would find another way to tell them about the behavior change protocol that you're doing. So you want to know what the terminology is in order to accurately represent it to other people. You also want to make sure you understand why you're implementing what you're implementing. And to do that, we all have to be speaking the same language. So now for the end of this presentation, let's have a little thought exercise. I was on Facebook the other day and I saw one of those online fitness coaches post, if you have 30 minutes to be on your phone, then you have 30 minutes to be at the gym. And that really bothered me because it wasn't really taking into consideration the behavioral contingencies that are in play in both of those scenarios. So let's break it down. Let's start with being on your cell phone for 30 minutes. So being on your cell phone is very low effort, doesn't require a lot of you, and the reinforcement is immediate. You probably get a ton of positive reinforcement from Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and text messages. It's very reinforcing to be on your phone, and it doesn't require much effort. So the matching law works there. You're getting a lot of reinforcement for a little bit of effort. That means you really, really like it. Now, let's take exercising. So you might get some endorphins from exercising, which that would be positively reinforcing. But what else do you get when you exercise? You get sweaty and hot and hungry and sore, and all of those things are positive punishment. And they're immediate. And they're pretty great. When your body is sore, what it wants to do is rest. It wants to not do the behavior anymore that made it sore. And the reinforcement that comes from exercising can take months. So does that really compete with the immediate punishment that comes from exercising? And does that punishment, is that better than the reinforcement you get from checking your phone or from being on Facebook? So I think it's really easy for people to just say things like, well, you had the time, then you should have just done it. Well, that takes out of consideration all of these behavioral contingencies, how we maintain behavior, how we change behavior. Maybe if you were looking at it from the motivating operations standpoint where, yeah, maybe if I took Facebook and Instagram off of my phone, I wouldn't get as much positive reinforcement from it. I wouldn't be as likely to spend time on there. Or if I added a super strong positive reinforcer to my workout routine, maybe it would overshadow the positive punishing consequences. So maybe after I go to the gym, my husband hands me $25. And that's worth it because I am poor and I need the money. So in that scenario, you've got your setting conditions. I'm poor. Facebook's not on my phone. And that all makes the reinforcement and punishment more valuable. I really want that $25. I really want to buy a new pair of shoes or go to Chipotle or something like that. So that reinforcement is super, super, super important to me. And since I don't have Facebook on my phone, I'm not going to get all the reinforcement I want from it. So that reinforcement's really not as valuable to me. And I mention this because people think ABA is just for individuals with autism, but it's not. It's for everything we do all the time. Everything is behavior. And it's really fun to look at almost every aspect of your life in these behavioral contingencies. At least it is for me, but that's why I'm in this field. But next time you're stuck on your goals or you don't understand why a kid is not learning or not behaving a certain way, take a step back. Look at the motivating operations. Look at your reinforcement procedure. Is what you're doing actually punishing? Do they actually like what you're giving them as reinforcer, or is it just something that you think is reinforcing? So these are all things that we should be looking at in our day-to-day lives, at work and in our personal lives, and using them to help us build better lives, better behavioral contingencies for ourselves and those around us. Thank you for talking about behavior with me today. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen, and I hope to speak with you soon.